The morning mist hung thick over Heathrow Airport as Lady Catherine Westfield adjusted her oversized sunglasses and pulled her silk scarf tighter around her neck. At 68 years old, she had learned to move through crowds with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. Her husband, Lord Marcus Westfield, had ruled the fictional kingdom of Britannia for nearly 2 decades, and Catherine had been his devoted queen consort throughout their reign. But today was different. Today, Catherine wasn't traveling as royalty making an official visit. She was traveling as a woman with a desperate secret, clutching a leather handbag that contained items worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Inside her bag lay 3 of the most precious pieces from the Britannia. Crown jewels, the sapphire of Eternia, a rare blue stone the size of a golf ball that had been in the royal family for over 400 years. The diamond tears of Britannia, a necklace containing 147 perfectly cut diamonds, and the ruby crown of Queen Isabella, a delicate tiara that had crowned every queen of Britannia since 1542. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she approached the security checkpoint. She had never imagined she would find herself in this position. Just 3 months ago, she had been planning charity galas and attending ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Now she was attempting to smuggle priceless artifacts out of the country, hoping to save her family from a scandal that could destroy the monarchy forever. The trouble had started when her youngest son, Prince Theodore, had fallen into serious debt with some very dangerous people. Theodore had always been the wild child of the family, but his gambling addiction had spiraled completely out of control. He owed £12 million to a criminal organization that had made it very clear they would not wait much longer for payment. They had photographs of Theodore in compromising situations, evidence of his involvement in illegal activities, and enough ammunition to bring down the entire royal family. Catherine had exhausted every legal option. The royal treasury was strictly monitored, and any large withdrawal would require approval from Parliament. She couldn't ask Marcus for help because the stress of the situation had already landed him in the hospital with chest pains twice in the past month. The doctors had warned that any additional stress could trigger a serious heart attack, so Catherine had made the most difficult decision of her life. She would sell the crown jewels privately to an international collector who had been discreetly inquiring about acquiring pieces from various royal collections. The man, known only as Mr. Chen, had connections throughout Asia and had promised to pay cash with no questions asked. The sale would generate enough money to pay off Theodore's debts and still leave several £1,000,000 to quietly return to the royal treasury later. As Catherine waited in line for security, she observed the other passengers around her. A businessman typed frantically on his laptop while talking loudly on his phone about quarterly earnings. A young mother struggled to manage 3 small children while juggling diaper bags and snacks. An elderly couple studied their boarding passes with confusion, clearly nervous about flying. Everyone seemed absorbed in their own concerns, completely unaware that royalty walked among them. Catherine had spent weeks planning this trip. She had arranged for a private meeting with Mr. Chen in Hong Kong, telling her staff she was visiting her sister who lived there. She had even arranged for her sister Margaret to be part of the cover story, though Margaret had no idea what Catherine was really planning. As far as the palace staff knew, this was a routine family visit that had been postponed several times due to Marcus's health issues. The queen consort had chosen her travel outfit carefully. She wore a simple black pantsuit that wouldn't draw attention, comfortable walking shoes, and minimal jewelry except for her wedding ring and a small pair of pearl earrings. Her hair was styled in a more casual way than usual, and she had applied her makeup more lightly than she would for public appearances. She wanted to blend in with regular travelers as much as possible. When Catherine finally reached the front of the security line, her heart began pounding so hard she was certain everyone around her could hear it. The security guard, a young woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly and asked for her identification and boarding pass. Catherine handed over her documents using her legal name rather than any royal titles. "Traveling for business or pleasure, ma'am?" the guard asked in a friendly tone. "Visiting family," Catherine replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside her. The guard nodded and gestured for Catherine to place her belongings in the plastic bins for X-ray screening. This was the moment Catherine had been dreading. She placed her handbag in the bin, watching as it disappeared into the machine that would reveal everything inside. Behind the X-ray monitor, the operator frowned as unusual shapes appeared on the screen. The images showed dense, irregularly shaped objects that didn't match typical travel items. Metal objects with intricate details that seemed far too elaborate for ordinary jewelry. The operator called over a supervisor who studied the screen with growing concern. Catherine stood in the body scanner, trying to appear calm while her entire future hung in the balance. She thought about Theodore, probably sitting in his apartment right now, unaware that his mother was risking everything to save him. She thought about Marcus, recovering in their private quarters at the palace, trusting her to handle the family crisis while he regained his strength. When Catherine stepped out of the body scanner, she noticed the security staff exchanging glances and speaking in low voices. Her stomach dropped as she realized they were looking at the X-ray images of her bag with obvious suspicion. "Ma'am, we're going to need to do a manual inspection of your carry-on bag," the supervisor announced, his tone professional but firm. Catherine nodded, trying to maintain the composure she had learned through decades of public appearances. But inside, she felt her carefully constructed plan beginning to crumble around her. The supervisor, whose name tag read James Morrison, led Catherine to a private screening area away from the main security checkpoint. The small room contained a metal table, 2 chairs, and bright fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and clinical. Catherine's handbag sat in the center of the table like evidence at a crime scene. "Please have a seat, ma'am," Morrison said, gesturing to one of the chairs.
"This is just routine."
"We occasionally need to manually inspect items that appear unusual on our scanners." Catherine sat down, clasping her hands in her lap to stop them from shaking. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind dozens of times, but now that it was actually happening, she felt completely unprepared. Morrison opened her handbag carefully, as if he expected something dangerous to jump out. The first items he removed were completely normal: a wallet, tissues, breath mints, a small bottle of hand sanitizer, and reading glasses. Catherine felt a tiny spark of hope as these everyday objects seemed to satisfy Morrison's initial concerns. But then his fingers found the bottom compartment of the bag, the one with the hidden zipper that Catherine had hoped would escape notice. "What's in here?" Morrison asked, his fingers tracing the outline of the concealed pocket. "Just some personal items," Catherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison opened the hidden compartment, and his eyes widened as he saw the dark velvet pouches inside. He carefully removed the first pouch and loosened the drawstring. When he poured the contents into his palm, the sapphire of Eternia caught the fluorescent light and seemed to glow with an inner fire. "Ma'am," Morrison said slowly, his voice taking on a completely different tone, "this appears to be a very valuable gemstone. Do you have documentation for this item?" Catherine's mind raced. She had prepared documents, but they were forgeries that claimed the pieces were family heirlooms rather than crown jewels. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope containing the fake certificates of authenticity. "These pieces have been in my family for generations," she said, trying to sound confident. "I'm taking them to Hong Kong to have them appraised for insurance purposes." Morrison examined the documents while carefully removing the other 2 pouches from Catherine's bag. When he opened them and saw the diamond tears necklace and the ruby crown, his expression became increasingly serious. Even someone without expertise in precious gems could see that these pieces were extraordinary. "I'm going to need to call in our specialist," Morrison said, reaching for his radio. "These items are quite valuable, and we need to verify their authenticity and legal status." Catherine felt her world beginning to collapse. She had been so focused on the financial aspects of her plan that she hadn't fully considered the security implications. Of course, airport security would be suspicious of someone traveling with millions of pounds worth of jewelry. She should have shipped the items separately or found another way to transport them. While they waited for the specialist, Morrison made small talk in an attempt to ease the tension. "Are you traveling alone today?" "Yes," Catherine replied. "My husband couldn't make the trip due to health issues." "I'm sorry to hear that. Hong Kong is lovely this time of year, though. Are you staying long?" "Just a few days," Catherine said, trying to maintain normal conversation while her heart pounded with anxiety. The specialist who arrived 15 minutes later was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Sarah Chen, who introduced herself as an expert in precious stones and valuable artifacts. She wore a white lab coat and carried a small case containing various examination tools. "May I?" Dr. Chen asked, gesturing toward the jewelry pieces. Catherine nodded, watching as Dr. Chen put on a pair of magnifying glasses and began examining each piece with scientific precision. She used a small flashlight to study the cut and clarity of the stones, measured various dimensions with tiny instruments, and even took several photographs from different angles. The examination seemed to last forever. Catherine found herself memorizing every detail of the small room, from the scuffed linoleum floor to the water stain on the ceiling tile above her head. She thought about Marcus, who was probably wondering why she hadn't called to confirm her safe arrival. She thought about Theodore, who had no idea that his mother was sitting in an airport security office, possibly minutes away from being arrested. Finally, Dr. Chen looked up from her examination with a puzzled expression. "These pieces are remarkable," she said to Morrison. "The craftsmanship is exceptional, and the stones appear to be genuine. But there's something unusual about them." Catherine's stomach lurched. "What do you mean?" Dr. Chen picked up the ruby crown and pointed to a small marking on the inner band. "This hallmark indicates that this piece was made by the Royal Workshop of Britannia. This type of marking is only used on pieces created specifically for the royal family." Morrison and Dr. Chen exchanged meaningful glances. Catherine realized that her cover story was beginning to fall apart. She tried to think of an explanation that might make sense. "My great-grandmother worked for the royal family," Catherine said quickly. "This piece was a gift to her for her years of loyal service." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully, but Catherine could see skepticism in her eyes. "That's possible," Dr. Chen said diplomatically. "However, pieces of this quality and historical significance would typically be documented in official records. The Royal Workshop has kept detailed records of all their creations for the past 500 years. Catherine felt trapped. Every answer she gave seemed to dig her deeper into a hole. She considered telling the truth about her identity, but that would only make things worse. If they discovered that the Queen Consort of Britannia was attempting to smuggle crown jewels out of the country, it would create an international incident. Morrison was writing notes in a small notebook while Dr. Chen continued her examination. "Ma'am," Morrison said without looking up, "I'm going to need to contact our supervisor before we can allow you to proceed with these items." "How long will that take?" Catherine asked, glancing at her watch. Her flight was scheduled to depart in less than 2 hours. "It's hard to say," Morrison replied. "Depends on how quickly we can verify the documentation and legal status of these pieces." Catherine realized that she was running out of time and options. Her carefully planned escape was crumbling, and she was no closer to solving Theodore's problems than she had been when she started. She thought about calling off the entire plan and returning home, but that would still leave Theodore in danger and the royal family vulnerable to scandal. As Dr. Chen packed up her examination tools, she made a comment that sent chills down Catherine's spine. "I think we should contact the Britannia Embassy. They might be able to help us verify the provenance of these pieces." Catherine's blood turned to ice when she heard Dr. Chen mention contacting the Britannia Embassy. She knew that once embassy officials became involved, her true identity would be discovered within minutes. Embassy staff would recognize her immediately, and the scandal she was trying to prevent would explode into international headlines. "Is that really necessary?" Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just a private citizen traveling with family heirlooms. Surely we can resolve this without involving government officials." Morrison looked up from his notebook with a more serious expression than before. "Ma'am, when we encounter items of this apparent value and historical significance, we're required to follow specific protocols. The embassy contact is standard procedure." Dr. Chen was already reaching for her phone when a young security officer burst into the room looking flustered. "Mr. Morrison, sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation developing at Gate 47. There's been a security alert, and they need all available specialists immediately." Morrison frowned and looked at his watch. "What kind of situation?" "Possible explosive device in an abandoned backpack. The bomb squad is en route, but they want our team to help evacuate the area and secure any evidence." Catherine watched this exchange with growing hope. Perhaps this emergency would buy her the time she needed to figure out her next move. Morrison seemed torn between his current investigation and the urgent situation developing elsewhere in the airport. "Dr. Chen," Morrison said finally, "can you continue here while I assist with the Gate 47 situation? Just keep everything secure until I return." Dr. Chen nodded, but she looked uncomfortable with the responsibility. How long do you think you'll be? Could be anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours, depending on what we find, Morrison replied, already heading toward the door. Don't let anyone leave with those items until we've completed our verification process. After Morrison left, the atmosphere in the small room became less formal but more awkward. Dr. Chen seemed uncertain about how to proceed, and Catherine sensed an opportunity to influence the situation. Dr. Chen, Catherine said softly, may I ask where you're from originally? Your accent sounds familiar. I grew up in Britannia, actually, Dr. Chen replied, seeming relieved to have something to talk about other than the jewelry. My family moved to London when I was 12. I studied gemology at the Royal Institute before taking this position here. Catherine felt a spark of hope. Perhaps she could find common ground with Dr. Chen that might help her situation. London is such a beautiful city. Do you miss it? Every day, Dr. Chen said with a wistful smile. Especially during royal events. I used to love watching the ceremonies and parades. There's something magical about the monarchy, don't you think? Yes, Catherine agreed carefully. The royal family has always been a source of pride for our country. As they talked, Catherine noticed that Dr. Chen kept glancing at her with a puzzled expression, as if she was trying to remember something. Catherine's heart began racing again as she realized that Dr. Chen might be starting to recognize her face. Have we met before? Dr. Chen asked suddenly. You look very familiar to me. Catherine forced a laugh. I have one of those faces that people think they recognize. I get that a lot. But Dr. Chen continued studying Catherine's features with growing interest. No, it's more than that. I feel like I've seen you somewhere specific, not just in passing. The conversation was interrupted when Dr. Chen's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed dramatically. Oh my goodness, she whispered, staring at her phone. What is it? Catherine asked, though she dreaded the answer. Dr. Chen held up her phone, showing a news alert with a headline that read, Queen Consort Catherine missing from palace. Royal staff concerned. Below the headline was a recent photograph of Catherine at a charity event, wearing the same pearl earrings she had on today. Dr. Chen began, her voice trailing off as she looked back and forth between Catherine and the photograph. Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. There was no point in continuing the charade now. Yes, she said quietly. I am Queen Consort Catherine of Britannia. Dr. Chen's hand flew to her mouth in shock. Your Majesty, I don't understand. What are you doing here? And these jewels? It's a very complicated situation, Catherine said, her royal composure returning now that her identity was revealed. I'm trying to help my family through a crisis, and I made some poor decisions about how to handle it. Dr. Chen looked completely overwhelmed. Your Majesty, I need to contact my supervisor immediately. This is far beyond my authority to handle. Please, Catherine said, leaning forward in her chair. Before you make any calls, let me explain what's really happening. My son is in serious trouble, and I'm trying to save him from people who could destroy our entire family. Dr. Chen hesitated, clearly torn between her professional obligations and her respect for royalty. Your Majesty, I swore an oath to protect Britannia and serve the crown. But I also have duties to my employer here. I understand your position, Catherine said, but I'm asking you, as one citizen of Britannia to another, to hear me out before you act. Dr. Chen glanced toward the door, probably wondering when Morrison would return. Your Majesty, if you're really the Queen Consort, why are you traveling under a false name? Why not use your diplomatic status? Because this mission cannot be connected to the royal family officially, Catherine explained. If word gets out about what I'm doing, it will create a scandal that could damage the monarchy permanently. Dr. Chen sat down heavily in her chair, clearly struggling with the magnitude of the situation she had stumbled into. Your Majesty, these jewels, they're from the crown collection, aren't they? Catherine nodded slowly. The sapphire of Eternia, the diamond tears of Britannia, and the ruby crown of Queen Isabella. But Your Majesty, taking the crown jewels without authorization. I know exactly what it is, Catherine interrupted. But sometimes we must choose between following rules and protecting the people we love. My son's life is in danger, and these pieces represent his only chance of survival. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. Your Majesty, what exactly happened to Prince Theodore? Catherine realized that she was about to trust a complete stranger with information that could destroy her family. But she had no other choice. Dr. Chen held Catherine's fate in her hands, and honesty might be her only chance of gaining the young woman's sympathy. "Theodore has a gambling addiction," Catherine began. "He owes £12 million to some very dangerous people who have threatened to kill him if he doesn't pay. They also have compromising photographs and evidence that they plan to release to the media if we don't cooperate." Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she began to understand the scope of the crisis. "And you're planning to sell these pieces to raise the money?" "A private collector in Hong Kong has agreed to purchase them with no questions asked," Catherine confirmed. "It was the only way I could think of to get that much money quickly, without going through official channels that would expose the situation." The two women sat in silence, both understanding that they had reached a critical moment that would determine not just Catherine's fate, but potentially the future of the Britannia monarchy itself. Dr. Chen stared at the precious jewels scattered across the metal table, then back at Catherine's desperate face. The weight of the decision before her was overwhelming. As a citizen of Britannia, she felt deep loyalty to the crown, but as a security specialist, she had obligations to follow protocol and uphold the law. "Your Majesty," Dr. Chen said slowly, "what you're asking me to do could end my career and possibly land me in prison. If I help you circumvent security procedures and something goes wrong, I understand the risk I'm asking you to take," Catherine replied. "But Sarah, may I call you Sarah? You mentioned that you loved watching royal ceremonies. You said there was something magical about the monarchy. If this scandal breaks, that magic will be destroyed forever. The people of Britannia will lose faith in the institution that has guided our country for over 1,000 years." Sarah looked torn. "But Your Majesty, surely there must be another way. Can't you appeal to Parliament for emergency funds? Or perhaps the Prime Minister could help arrange a private loan?" Catherine shook her head sadly. "Any official request for that amount of money would require explanations that we cannot provide. The moment Parliament or the Prime Minister learns about Theodore's debts and the threats against him, it becomes a matter of public record. Within days, every newspaper in the world would be running the story. What about King Marcus? Surely he would understand." "My husband is recovering from a serious heart condition," Catherine explained. "The doctors have warned that any additional stress could trigger a fatal heart attack. He doesn't even know about Theodore's situation. I've been handling this crisis alone for months, trying to protect both my son and my husband." Sarah picked up the sapphire of Eternia and examined it more closely. Even under the harsh fluorescent lights, the stone seemed to pulse with deep blue fire. "These pieces are priceless artifacts. They belong to the people of Britannia, not to any individual, even royalty." "You're absolutely right," Catherine agreed. "Under normal circumstances, I would never consider this course of action. But we're not dealing with normal circumstances. The people who are threatening Theodore are not the type to be reasoned with or bought off with promises. They want their money now, or they will destroy my family and, by extension, the monarchy itself." Sarah stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the busy airport concourse. Thousands of people moved through the terminal, completely unaware that the fate of their country's royal family was being decided in a small security room just a few yards away. "Your Majesty," Sarah said without turning around, "if I help you, what happens when these pieces are discovered missing? There will be investigations, security reviews, people will lose their jobs, and I've thought about that," Catherine replied. "The pieces won't be discovered missing for at least 2 weeks. I arranged for the vault to be sealed for inventory purposes, and I'm the only one with authorization to access it during that time. That gives me time to complete the sale and figure out how to return the pieces, or replace them with convincing replicas." "Replace them with replicas?" Sarah turned around looking shocked. "Your Majesty, that would be—" "I know how it sounds," Catherine interrupted. "But I'm hoping that the collector in Hong Kong will agree to a temporary arrangement. If I can convince him to loan me the money using the jewels as collateral, I might be able to return them to the vault before anyone discovers they're missing." Sarah returned to her seat, still holding the sapphire. "And if the collector refuses to make it a loan arrangement?" Catherine's shoulders sagged. "Then I'll have to confess everything to Marcus and hope he survives the shock. Either way, my son's life will be saved, and that's what matters most to me right now." The two women were startled by the sound of Sarah's radio crackling to life. Morrison's voice came through the static. Dr. Chen, what's your status on the jewelry investigation? Sarah looked at Catherine with panic in her eyes. Catherine nodded slightly, indicating that Sarah should answer normally. Still conducting the examination, Mr. Morrison, Sarah replied. The pieces are quite complex and I want to be thorough. Copy that. The situation at Gate 47 turned out to be a false alarm, but we're doing a complete security sweep before reopening that section. I should be back to you within the hour. Sarah set down her radio and looked at Catherine with a conflicted expression. Your Majesty, I need to make a decision soon. Mr. Morrison will expect a complete report when he returns. What would it take for you to help me? Catherine asked quietly. Sarah thought carefully before responding. I would need your personal guarantee that these pieces will be returned to the royal collection, even if it means confessing everything to King Marcus. You have my word as Queen Consort of Britannia, Catherine said solemnly. And I would need assurance that no one else will be blamed for any security failures that might be discovered later. I will take full responsibility for everything, Catherine promised. If anyone faces consequences for what happens today, it will be me alone. Sarah picked up the diamond tears necklace and held it up to the light. The 147 diamonds sparkled like stars, each one perfectly cut and flawlessly clear. Your Majesty, these pieces represent more than just money. They're symbols of Britannia's history and heritage. I know, Catherine said softly. That's why this decision has been so agonizing for me. But symbols don't mean anything if the institution they represent is destroyed by scandal. Sarah made her decision. Your Majesty, I'm going to help you, but we need to do this carefully. Mr. Morrison will want to see documentation that proves these pieces can legally leave the country. What kind of documentation? Export permits, insurance certificates, proof of ownership that can be verified through official channels, Sarah explained. Without proper paperwork, even if we let you through security, customs officials in Hong Kong might confiscate the pieces when you arrive. Catherine felt her heart sink. I don't have those documents. The forged certificates I brought won't hold up to serious scrutiny. Sarah thought for a moment. Your Majesty, there might be another way. If you were traveling on an official diplomatic passport instead of under your assumed identity, you would have diplomatic immunity. Customs officials couldn't search your belongings without creating an international incident. But using my diplomatic status would create an official record of the trip, Catherine objected. The palace staff would know where I went and when. Not necessarily, Sarah said with growing excitement. If you were making an emergency diplomatic visit, say, to visit a family member who had been hospitalized, the trip could be arranged through back channels with minimal documentation. Catherine considered this possibility. My sister Margaret does live in Hong Kong. If I claimed she had been in an accident, it would explain the urgency and the need for privacy, Sarah agreed. And it would give you legal protection for transporting valuable items. Suddenly, they heard footsteps approaching in the hallway outside. Sarah quickly gathered up the jewels and placed them back in their velvet pouches, then gestured for Catherine to put them back in her handbag. Your Majesty, Sarah whispered urgently. Do you trust me to handle this? I don't have any other choice, Catherine replied, closing her handbag with trembling hands. The footsteps stopped right outside their door. The door opened and Morrison stepped back into the room, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit whom Catherine didn't recognize. The stranger had sharp eyes and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Dr. Chen, Morrison said. This is Inspector William Hayes from Interpol. He's here regarding some inquiries about valuable artifacts that might be moving through international channels. Catherine felt her blood turn to ice. Interpol's involvement meant this situation had escalated far beyond airport security. Inspector Hayes studied both women with the calculating gaze of someone trained to detect deception. Ladies, Hayes said in a crisp accent, I apologize for the interruption, but we've received intelligence about a possible theft of significant cultural artifacts from Britannia. We're conducting routine checks at major international airports. Sarah glanced nervously at Catherine before responding. Inspector, we've been examining some jewelry pieces, but they appear to be legitimate family heirlooms with proper documentation. Hayes approached the table where Catherine's handbag sat. May I see the documentation and the pieces in question? Catherine's mind raced. If Inspector Hayes was specifically looking for stolen artifacts from Britannia, he might recognize the crown jewels immediately. Her only hope was that Sarah's quick thinking about diplomatic immunity might still provide a way out. "Inspector," Catherine said, standing up with as much royal dignity as she could muster, "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. I am Catherine Westfield, Queen Consort of Britannia, traveling on urgent diplomatic business." Hayes raised an eyebrow but didn't seem particularly surprised. "Your Majesty, we weren't informed of any official royal visits to Hong Kong. The Britannia Embassy had no record of your travel plans." "This is an emergency personal matter," Catherine explained. "My sister has been hospitalized and I'm traveling to see her. The trip was arranged through private channels to maintain family privacy." Morrison looked confused. "Your Majesty, when you checked in, you used a different name and presented civilian identification." "For security reasons," Catherine replied smoothly. "Recent intelligence suggests there may be threats against royal family members traveling abroad. My security team recommended I use alternative identification for the commercial portions of my journey." Inspector Hayes studied Catherine's face carefully. "Your Majesty, if you're traveling on diplomatic business, you should have appropriate credentials and diplomatic immunity protections. May I see your diplomatic passport?" Catherine's heart sank. She didn't have a diplomatic passport with her, only the civilian documents she had used to check in. Sarah stepped forward, clearly trying to help. "Inspector," Sarah said. Her Majesty explained that this was arranged hastily due to the family emergency. Perhaps the diplomatic credentials are being handled separately. Hayes wasn't convinced. "Your Majesty, I'm going to need to verify your identity and travel authorization through official channels. This will require contacting the Britannia Embassy and possibly your palace security team. That would defeat the purpose of maintaining privacy for this family matter," Catherine protested. "Surely you can understand the need for discretion when dealing with a medical emergency." "I understand Your Majesty's position," Hayes replied diplomatically. "But when we're investigating potential theft of national treasures, we must follow proper protocols regardless of the individuals involved." Catherine realized that her situation was becoming hopeless. Even if she could convince Hayes of her identity, any investigation would eventually reveal that she had taken the crown jewels without authorization. She was trapped between exposing her son's crisis and facing charges for theft. Sarah made a desperate attempt to buy more time. "Inspector, perhaps we could continue this discussion in a more private setting. If Her Majesty is indeed who she claims to be, conducting this investigation in an airport security office seems inappropriate." Hayes considered this suggestion. "That's reasonable. We have facilities at the Interpol office in the city, where we can properly verify identities and documentation. Your Majesty, would you be willing to accompany me there for a brief interview?" Catherine knew that accepting would mean missing her flight and probably exposing everything, but refusing would only make her look more suspicious. "Inspector, I have a very tight schedule due to my sister's condition. Could we perhaps handle this after I've had a chance to see her?" "I'm afraid not, Your Majesty. The investigation takes priority, especially given the nature of the items involved." Morrison had been listening to this exchange with growing confusion. "Inspector, what exactly are we looking for?" Dr. Chen's examination suggested these pieces might be significant, but the owner provided documentation of legal ownership. Hayes pulled out his phone and showed Morrison a photograph. "These are images of 3 specific pieces reported missing from a secure location in Britannia: the sapphire of Eternia, the diamond tears necklace, and the ruby crown of Queen Isabella." Catherine watched as Morrison's expression changed when he saw the photographs. Even someone without expertise in precious gems could see that the items in Catherine's bag matched the stolen pieces exactly. "Your Majesty," Hayes said, his tone becoming more formal, "I'm going to need you to open your handbag so we can compare the items you're carrying with these photographs." Catherine looked at Sarah, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Catherine realized that Sarah was trying to signal something, but she couldn't understand what. "Inspector," Sarah said suddenly, "before we proceed, I should mention that I've discovered some irregularities in our security system today. It's possible that the X-ray images we captured earlier may have been compromised." Hayes frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" "Technical glitches that could have affected the accuracy of our scans," Sarah explained. "I was planning to report them after completing this examination, but given the seriousness of your investigation, perhaps we should verify our equipment before drawing any conclusions." Catherine began to understand Sarah's strategy. By questioning the reliability of the evidence, Sarah was trying to create reasonable doubt about what the security scans had actually revealed. Morrison looked frustrated. "Dr. Chen, why didn't you mention these technical issues earlier?" "I wanted to complete a thorough manual examination before reporting equipment problems," Sarah replied. "It's possible that what we thought we saw in the X-ray images was actually distorted or enhanced by the technical malfunction." Inspector Hayes seemed skeptical, but intrigued. "Are you suggesting that the images showing these valuable items might not be accurate?" "I'm suggesting that we should verify our findings through multiple methods before making any definitive conclusions," Sarah answered carefully. Catherine marveled at Sarah's quick thinking. While the security expert was creating confusion about the evidence, Catherine tried to think of her next move. Her flight was scheduled to depart in less than an hour, and every minute they spent in this room made her mission less likely to succeed. "Inspector," Catherine said, "while I appreciate your thoroughness, I really must insist on proceeding with my travel plans. My sister's condition is quite serious, and every hour of delay could be critical." Hayes looked torn between his professional obligations and the diplomatic complications of detaining a foreign royal. "Your Majesty, if you could just allow us to quickly examine the contents of your bag to confirm they don't match the stolen items, we could resolve this matter quickly." Catherine knew she was out of options. In a few moments, Hayes would see the crown jewels and her desperate mission would be over. But as she reached for her handbag, Sarah made one final, unexpected move. Sarah suddenly pressed the emergency alarm button on the wall behind her. Immediately, red lights began flashing throughout the security area, and a loud siren started wailing. Over the intercom system, an automated voice announced, "Security alert in Terminal 3. All personnel report to stations immediately." "What's happening?" Inspector Hayes shouted over the noise, instinctively reaching for his radio. "I'm sorry," Sarah called back. "I accidentally triggered the emergency system while trying to access the equipment diagnostic panel. It happens sometimes when we have technical malfunctions." The alarm created instant chaos throughout the security checkpoint. Guards came running from all directions. Passengers began looking around nervously, and the normal flow of airport operations ground to a halt. In the confusion, Sarah quickly moved to Catherine's side. "Your Majesty," Sarah whispered urgently, "when I turn off this alarm, there will be about 30 seconds of confusion while everyone figures out what happened. Use that time to walk quickly toward Gate 12. Don't run, but move with purpose. I'll handle the situation here." "But what about the investigation?" Catherine whispered back. "I'm going to tell them you were called away on urgent diplomatic business and that your embassy liaison is handling any further questions," Sarah replied. "It will buy you time, but not much." Inspector Hayes was trying to coordinate with the responding security personnel, while Morrison attempted to shut off the alarm system. The small examination room had become the center of a miniature crisis, with people shouting instructions and radio chatter filling the air. Sarah caught Catherine's eye and mouthed the word "now" before moving to the alarm control panel. When the siren suddenly stopped, the relative silence was almost deafening. In that moment of confusion, Catherine calmly picked up her handbag and walked out of the room. She moved through the security area with the practiced poise of someone who had spent decades attending public events. Airport security personnel were so focused on determining what had caused the alarm that none of them paid attention to one more person moving through the checkpoint. Catherine reached the main concourse and immediately headed toward Gate 12. But she had no intention of staying there. Instead, she used her knowledge of airport layouts to navigate toward the diplomatic services area, where she hoped to find a different way to resolve her situation. As she walked, Catherine could hear her phone buzzing with incoming messages, probably from palace staff wondering about her delayed arrival confirmation. She ignored the calls and focused on reaching the diplomatic services office before Inspector Hayes realized she was gone. The diplomatic services area was located in a quieter section of the airport, away from the main passenger traffic. Catherine approached the reception desk where a young man in a crisp uniform was processing paperwork. "I need to speak with someone about arranging emergency diplomatic transportation," Catherine said, trying to sound official but not too urgent. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile. "Certainly, ma'am. Do you have your diplomatic credentials with you?" Catherine realized she was about to take the biggest risk of her entire plan. I am Catherine Westfield, Queen Consort of Britannia. I'm traveling on urgent family business and I need assistance with expedited processing. The young man's eyes widened and he immediately stood up. Your Majesty, we weren't expecting... That is, we don't have any record of your visit. This is an emergency situation involving a family member, Catherine explained. The arrangements were made through private channels to maintain confidentiality. I need to reach Hong Kong as soon as possible. The receptionist looked uncertain but clearly didn't want to risk offending royalty. Your Majesty, let me contact our supervisor immediately. Please have a seat while I make some calls. Catherine sat down in the small waiting area, her heart still pounding from the escape from the security office. She knew that Inspector Hayes would discover her absence within minutes, and then airport security would be looking for her throughout the terminal. While she waited, Catherine noticed a television screen showing international news. To her horror, one of the headlines read, "Britannia Palace confirms Queen Consort missing from official schedule." The story was starting to break publicly, which meant she had even less time than she had thought. The supervisor who emerged from the back office was a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Your Majesty," she said with a respectful bow, "I'm Margaret Thompson, Chief of Diplomatic Services. I understand you need assistance with emergency travel arrangements." "Ms. Thompson," Catherine said, standing to greet her, "I need to reach Hong Kong immediately to see my sister, who has been hospitalized. The trip was arranged privately, but I may need diplomatic protections for some personal items I'm carrying." Ms. Thompson nodded sympathetically. "Your Majesty, we can certainly arrange diplomatic transportation and ensure your items receive proper protection. However, we'll need to verify your identity and create official documentation for the trip." "How long would that take?" Catherine asked, glancing at her watch. "Under normal circumstances, several hours," Ms. Thompson replied. "But given the emergency nature of your request, we might be able to expedite the process. However, I should mention that we've received some inquiries from airport security about a possible investigation involving valuable artifacts." Catherine's heart sank. Inspector Hayes was already trying to track her down through official channels. "Ms. Thompson, I can assure you that any investigation is a misunderstanding. I'm carrying some family jewelry that may have appeared suspicious to security scanners, but everything is completely legitimate." Ms. Thompson looked thoughtful. "Your Majesty, if you're willing to submit to a formal diplomatic inspection of your items, we can provide you with official certification that would protect you from any further security issues." This was exactly what Catherine needed, but she worried about the time it would take. How quickly could such an inspection be completed? "If we start immediately, we could have you on a diplomatic flight within 2 hours, Ms. Thompson said. "We maintain emergency aircraft for exactly these types of situations." Catherine realized this might be her best chance to complete her mission successfully. A diplomatic flight would provide complete protection from further security investigations. An official certification would solve any problems she might face in Hong Kong. "Ms. Thompson, I accept your offer," Catherine said, "but I must ask for your complete discretion regarding this matter. The family situation I'm dealing with is quite sensitive. Of course, Your Majesty, all diplomatic matters are handled with the utmost confidentiality." As Ms. Thompson began making arrangements, Catherine felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She was closer to reaching Hong Kong and completing her mission, but she also knew that every official she involved in her plan increased the risk that word would eventually reach the palace. Her phone buzzed again with another message, this time from an unknown number. "Time is running out. Theodore's safety depends on prompt payment. Do not disappoint us." Catherine stared at the threatening message and realized that regardless of the risks she was taking, failure was not an option. Theodore's life hung in the balance and she was his only hope for survival. Ms. Thompson returned with a clipboard full of forms. "Your Majesty, we're preparing the diplomatic aircraft now. We just need to complete the official paperwork and conduct the item inspection. Then you'll be on your way to Hong Kong with full diplomatic protection." Catherine took the forms and began filling them out, knowing that each signature brought her closer to either saving her son or destroying her family forever. 12 hours later, Catherine sat in an elegant hotel suite overlooking Hong Kong's glittering skyline. The diplomatic flight had proceeded without incident, and her meeting with the mysterious collector, Mr. Chen, had been successfully completed. The 3 crown jewels now rested in his private vault, and Catherine had a briefcase containing £12 million in untraceable bearer bonds. But instead of relief, Catherine felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. She had accomplished her mission, but at what cost? The crown jewels that had symbolized Britannia's heritage for centuries were now in the hands of a private collector who cared nothing for their historical significance. Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding thoughts. The caller ID showed Theodore's number. "Mother," Theodore's voice was shaky but alive. "I can't believe you actually did it. The money has been transferred, and they've agreed to destroy all the evidence they had against me. Are you safe?" Catherine asked, her voice filled with maternal concern. "Yes, completely safe. But Mother, I had no idea you would go to such lengths. When I heard about your disappearance from the palace, I was terrified that something had happened to you." Catherine closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her decisions. "Theodore, what you did was incredibly dangerous and foolish. This crisis could have destroyed our entire family." "I know," Theodore replied, his voice filled with shame. "I've arranged to enter a private rehabilitation program in Switzerland. I want to get clean and make sure something like this never happens again." "That's a start," Catherine said. "But Theodore, we need to talk about what happens next. I can't simply return home and pretend nothing happened." "What do you mean?" Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the bustling city below. "The crown jewels are gone, Theodore. I sold pieces that belonged to the people of Britannia to save your life. Eventually someone will discover they're missing and there will be investigations." Theodore was quiet for a long moment. "Mother, what if we found a way to return them?" Mr. Chen seemed like a reasonable man. Maybe he would consider selling them back. Catherine had been thinking the same thing. He did mention that he was primarily interested in adding them to his collection temporarily. He's a collector, not a criminal. But buying them back would require almost as much money as we just paid to your creditors. "Then we'll find a way to get that money," Theodore said with determination. "I'll sell everything I own, liquidate all my investments. I'll work for the rest of my life if necessary to make this right." Catherine felt a spark of hope for the first time in months. Her son was finally taking responsibility for his actions and thinking about consequences beyond himself. "There might be another option," Catherine said thoughtfully. "Mr. Chen mentioned that he's always been fascinated by Britannia's royal family. What if we offered him something else in exchange for returning the jewels?" "What kind of something else?" "Official recognition, perhaps a knighthood for his charitable contributions. Access to private royal events. There are many things that money can't buy but royalty can provide." Theodore sounded interested. "Do you think he would go for that?" "It's worth exploring. But first, we need to figure out how to handle the situation back home. By now, Father must know that something is wrong." Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming call from the palace. She recognized the number as belonging to Marcus's private secretary. "Theodore, I have to take this call. We'll continue this discussion when I return." Catherine answered the palace call with trepidation. "This is Catherine." "Your Majesty," came the familiar voice of James Morrison, the King's secretary. "His Majesty is quite concerned about your extended absence. The press is starting to ask questions about your whereabouts." "How is his health?" Catherine asked, worried about the stress this situation might be causing Marcus. "He's stable but anxious, Your Majesty. He's asked me to arrange for you to call him as soon as possible." Catherine knew she couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "Please tell His Majesty that I'll call within the hour. And James, please ensure that the call is completely private." After ending the call, Catherine spent several minutes preparing for what would be the most difficult conversation of her marriage. She dialed Marcus's private number and waited for him to answer. "Catherine?" Marcus's voice was filled with relief and concern. "Where are you?" "What's happening?" "I'm in Hong Kong, Marcus." "I'm safe, but we need to talk about a very serious situation involving Theodore." Catherine spent the next 30 minutes explaining everything: Theodore's gambling addiction, the threats from creditors, her desperate decision to take the crown jewels, and the successful resolution of the immediate crisis. Marcus listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification but never expressing anger. When Catherine finished her story, Marcus was quiet for a long time. "Catherine," he finally said, "I wish you had come to me from the beginning. We could have found another way to handle this." "The doctors said any additional stress could trigger another heart attack," Catherine replied. "I couldn't risk losing you too." My dear, Marcus said gently, you are more important to me than my health. We're partners in this marriage and in ruling this country. You should never have to face something like this alone. Catherine felt tears starting to flow. Marcus, I've made such a mess of everything. The crown jewels are gone and eventually people will notice. Then we'll figure out how to get them back, Marcus said with determination. And if we can't, we'll deal with the consequences together. But Catherine, you need to come home. We'll work out a plan to handle everything. What about the press? They're already asking questions about my absence. Marcus was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. We'll tell them you were dealing with a family emergency that required privacy. It's not entirely untrue. Over the next 2 hours, Catherine and Marcus worked out a plan for returning home and beginning the process of recovering the crown jewels. Marcus would quietly reach out to diplomatic channels to explore options for negotiating with Mr. Chen. They would also begin preparing for the possibility that the theft might eventually become public, developing strategies for minimizing damage to the monarchy. Catherine also called Mr. Chen and explained her situation more fully. To her surprise, the collector was sympathetic and agreed to consider returning the pieces in exchange for official recognition and access to royal events. He had always dreamed of being knighted by the British crown, and Catherine's offer appealed to his vanity more than the jewels appealed to his greed. 3 days later, Catherine returned to Britannia aboard a private royal aircraft. The crown jewels were carefully packed in her diplomatic pouch, having been returned by Mr. Chen in exchange for a promise of future knighthood and an invitation to the next state dinner. Theodore met her at the airport, looking healthier than she had seen him in years. He had already begun his rehabilitation program and was committed to making amends for the crisis he had caused. The palace announced that the Queen Consort had returned from a private family visit and would be resuming her official duties immediately. No mention was made of missing jewels or international negotiations. 6 months later, Mr. Chen received his knighthood at a private ceremony at Buckingham Palace. Theodore had successfully completed his rehabilitation program and had begun working with a charity that helped people overcome gambling addiction. Marcus's health had improved significantly once the family crisis was resolved. And in the royal vault, 3 priceless artifacts rested safely in their designated places. Their brief adventure in Hong Kong, known only to a very small circle of people who would carry the secret for the rest of their lives. Catherine often thought about those terrifying days when she had risked everything to save her son. She had learned that even queens sometimes had to make impossible choices, and that love for family could drive even the most proper person to desperate measures. But she had also learned that facing problems together, rather than alone, was always the better path. The crown jewels had been returned, Theodore had been saved, and the monarchy had survived intact. Sometimes, Catherine reflected, the most important victories were the ones that no one else ever knew about.